This video was made possible thanks to PDS Debt, more on that shortly. In 2024, a news item generated a huge stir in Spain.
2 civil guards die after being rammed by a narco boat in Barbados.
In a nighttime chase of a National Guard patrol of a narco boat, 2 officers were killed and several others were injured. The 2 agents were the latest uniformed victims of a silent war being waged in the south of the Iberian Peninsula. Because in 2025, the situation, far from improving, seems to be getting worse and worse.
Cocaine is already flowing down the Guadalquivir. There will be more corruption and more death.
Spain is one of the main entry points for narcotics, and also one of the major logistical points in Europe for drug traffickers. Worst of all, not only is there no sign of this situation improving, but everything indicates that it's getting worse.
It's official. Europe is awash with drugs.
That's right. Europe is awash with illegal substances. It is so flooded, in fact, that consumption data are setting off alarm bells. Now, why? And why now? Well, to begin with, we have to be very clear about one thing: the idea on which this whole industry revolves. Without consumers, there would be no production. This seems like a no-brainer, right? Well, the implication is that it makes it very difficult to fight drug trafficking, because as long as there is demand, the money will just keep flowing. This is exactly what Mexican President Sheinbaum told Trump in one of their last calls. Don't tell me stories. If there's a problem with drugs in the United States, it's because there's demand. Well, the problem is that Europe is, as you can imagine, a huge hub of consumption. And the point is that it's becoming more and more so. We are nowhere near the levels of the United States, but the data are still disturbing. The presence of narcotics in Europe and Spain is not anything new. In fact, as far as Spain is concerned, we've already seen news stories like this.
The Supreme Court confirms the conviction of the sailors who used the Juan Sebastian Elcano to traffic drugs. The military took advantage of the lack of customs controls on the Navy training ship to move cocaine from Cartagena de Indias to New York.
Take note, more than 150 kilos of white powder transported by the most emblematic ship of the Spanish Navy. 30 kilos were dropped in New York, and the rest, well, arrived on the Iberian Peninsula on board this very important ship. Eat your heart out, Pablo Escobar. Of course, stories aside, the problem is that while the consumption of certain substances that are considered soft, such as cannabis derivatives or certain synthetic derivatives, has not had a pronounced increase in recent years, at the same time, there is one substance that has been increasing a lot in Europe. Any ideas? Well,
cocaine use has risen across Europe, study shows.
Now, why is this happening? Well, several reports point to one phenomenon above all others: overproduction of coca leaf in South America. Countries such as Colombia and Bolivia have a record number of hectares planted with this type of crop, and that, as you can probably imagine, has a direct consequence. If there's a lot more production, the product drops in price, demand surges, and on top of that, drug traffickers urgently seek to place more quantity in lucrative markets. Markets such as, you guessed it, the old continent. Now, what does all this that is happening in Colombia have to do with Spain? And why is it key to understanding the problem that is emerging in the southern part of the country? Well, you see, up until now, Spain used to receive mainly what were considered soft drugs, and they used to come mostly from Morocco. Meanwhile, most of the South American cocaine arrived in Europe via other routes that ended up in the Netherlands or Belgium. From there, it was then distributed, taking advantage of the fact that these countries are at the heart of the richest and most interconnected part of the entire continent. However, in recent years, these countries have begun to get much more serious about this issue.
Cocaine seizures fall in big EU ports as gangs target easier routes.
The result? Mafia groups are moving to find enclaves and routes where it's easier to operate. And that's how we get to Spain. A country where narco trade already had a considerable presence, but where the business is now mutating into a commodity.
The Spanish colleagues are now under increased pressure because the criminals have decided that Antwerp and Rotterdam are maybe less attractive now. They now target Spain more.
To give you an idea, Spain has already surpassed the former European leaders for the amount of cocaine seized: 142 tons, compared to 121 tons in Belgium and 60 tons in the Netherlands, according to data from 2023. And so, while only 4 years ago, Spain was the third country in Europe in terms of seizures, today it is at the top of the list. And yes, although part of this may be due to the fact that more controls have been put in place, the truth is that the report suggests that what is happening is something else entirely. That the underworld groups are increasingly betting on operating precisely in this country. And in that way, as more merchandise is moved, more seizures are achieved. For those of you who don't know this is in fact the way illegal markets are usually measured. If seizures suddenly start going up for no reason, it's a bad sign. And that's exactly what is happening in Spain. Now, VisualPolitik community, this is the key point of this video. To what extent is this a problem? And who exactly is to blame? Well, let's answer this question. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like no matter how much you earn, your debt just keeps piling up? Between credit cards, medical bills, and personal loans, it's easy to feel like you're just working to stay afloat. Trust me, I've been there, staring at bills, wondering how the balance grew so fast and how I'd ever catch up. That's why I want to tell you about PDS Debt. PDS Debt isn't just another debt service. They use smart technology to actually understand your unique financial situation and find real solutions. No cookie cutter plans, just personalized options designed to help you take back control. And here's the best part. You don't need a perfect credit score to get started. PDS Debt works with people in all kinds of situations. Getting started is easy. Just go to pdsdebt.com/VisualPolitikEN and take their free 30-second debt assessment. That's all it takes to see what's possible. Over 100,000 people have already used PDS Debt to resolve over $500 million in debt, and now they're here for you too. So don't let your debt control you any longer. Every day you wait is costing you money. Head to pdsdebt.com/VisualPolitikEN to take back control of your finances. That's pdsdebt.com/VisualPolitikEN. The link is in the description and the QR code is right here on the screen. Now, back to the video.
Fertile ground for the narco trade.
Take a look at this news item.
Record 13 tons of cocaine from Ecuador seized in Spain.
This operation at the end of 2024 was the largest seizure of white powder in the history of Spain. This operation beat the record of another one that had taken place just a year earlier, in 2023, when the National Guard seized 9.5 tons at the port of Algeciras. And so, in this way, from record to record, the situation only gets worse. But let's take a look at some specific factors to better understand what we're talking about. To begin with, we have to take one thing into account. 95% of these narcotics enter through commercial ports that handle millions of tons of goods every year. And what does that mean? In reality, finding these shipments is like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Spanish ports enter the podium of the favorite holes of drug traffickers to smuggle cocaine into Europe. Algeciras, Valencia, and Barcelona are among the European ports where most cocaine enters the continent, behind Antwerp and Rotterdam.
But who exactly is behind this increase in cocaine trafficking to Spain? Well, you see, in this particular case, we're talking mainly about Colombian cartels. And more specifically, one in particular, the Clan del Golfo, or Gulf Clan.
Also known as the Gaitanista Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, or the Urbeños, the Gulf Clan has become Colombia's main drug trafficking group since the fragmentation of FARC in 2016. The clan has managed to control a large part of the country's Caribbean departments, such as Córdoba, Sucre, and Magdalena, and almost completely runs the coca-based paste supply chain. We're talking about a chain that goes from production to the escort of shipments and sales to laboratories and consumers.
In Spain, Colombian groups have their own operational networks. That is, they work with local partners, but they manage the business themselves. This is a totally different situation from the rest of Europe, where Latin American cartels basically ally with local networks and mafia groups with whom they share the business. These local groups are in charge of all the activity in their territory. They receive the merchandise, move it, sell it, take care of collections, everything. In this way, we could say that here the Colombians are mere suppliers. But in Spain, as I said, the situation is totally different, which of course makes the whole racket potentially more dangerous. What can I say? I'm sure you all know how these LATAM narco groups get on. In fact, it's known that these groups are establishing what are known as Oficinas del Cobra in Spain, which are basically operational groups in charge of intimidating, attacking, and even murdering citizens in Spain, particularly Colombians who have debts with the drug traffickers. And the question is, why this difference with the rest of Europe? Well, obviously, cultural, language, and commercial ties have a lot to do with it. In fact, this explains why the presence of Colombian drug traffickers is not strictly new in Spain either. In one way or another, they've been in this country for decades. If you like, let's do a little reminiscing. This whole story began in Galicia, on Spain's northwest coast, a few decades ago. In the 1980s, when the Colombian government passed its extradition law to the United States, two major cartels, both the Medellin and Cali cartels, began operating in Spain. In fact, two of its leaders, Jorge Ochoa Vasquez for the Medellin cartel and Gilberto Rodriguez Orjuela for the Cali cartel, were arrested and imprisoned in Spain as early as 1984. However, what happened next was not in the plans of the Spanish police. Far from weakening, what happened was that a much stronger wave was produced. Do you know why? Well, because in prison, these Colombian drug lords established a relationship with Cito Miñaconto, a legendary smuggler from Galicia, a region in northern Spain, and then business boomed. The Galician smugglers played at home and moved like fish in water along the narrow and winding coast of Galicia, which made it much easier to get the merchandise in. Then came a point in which up to 50% of all the white powder that arrived to all Europe entered precisely through Galicia. Crazy! So a few years later, in the 1990s, the Spanish state finally unleashed a huge police and judicial war against these Galician drug traffickers, so that for years the situation was relatively under control. Faced with pressure from the Spanish authorities, traffickers sought safer routes, opted more for other countries, and the problem was diluted, although it never completely disappeared. The problem is that now, in a way, something similar may be happening, but in reverse. In other words, the risks that these networks are starting to take in Central European ports seem to be bringing the business back to Spain, and that is how we arrive at the current problem. Ports such as Algeciras, Valencia, and Barcelona have increasingly started to become hotspots for the entry of cocaine into the old continent. But why Spain and not any other country? Well, it's not only because in this country, as we have seen, the Colombian cartels already have experienced transport networks. There are other much more disturbing reasons. Pay attention to what we're going to tell you next.
Rotten from the inside?
Let's see. We've told you before that drug traffickers are moving intensively to Spain because of the increased police pressure in other European countries, particularly Belgium and the Netherlands. However, let's be clear, that is a compelling reason, but it cannot be the only one. There must be more. And yes, the truth is that there is more. Take a look at this news item.
Outcry over the lack of resources in the fight against drug traffickers. Police and customs surveillance agents warn of the lack of protection on the coast of Cadiz.
Several police forces in Spain have been complaining for years about the serious lack of resources they have to fight the increase in drug trafficking. In this case, what the police are basically asking for are more resources and more human resources. More police, more national guards, more patrol cars, more and better weapons, better technology. In other words, this is a serious matter. Now, why? Because recent governments, including the current one of Pedro Sanchez, have done little or nothing to increase the capacity to fight drug trafficking.
Homeland rejects patrol boats, human and technological resources of the armed forces against drug trafficking.
The current government has even eliminated police structures that were specifically created to fight drug trafficking. But do you want a concrete example of what I'm talking about? Well, take a look at this news item.
Drug seizures in the Strait dropped 10% after Marlaska dismantled Ocon South.
Now, what is this Ocon South? Well, it was an operational structure of the National Guard created precisely to direct operations against drug trafficking in the Campo del Gibraltar and other areas of southern Spain. Put another way, it was the structure to fight against drug trafficking in the area with the most drug trafficking in the whole country. We're talking about a special operation with about 150 agents that had managed to arrest 10,000 people and seize about 1,400 tons of drugs in 4 years. Well, in 2023, at the height of the increase in cocaine trafficking into Spain, the Spanish Minister of the Interior, Fernando Grande Marlaska, suddenly decided to eliminate this structure. According to him, the objective was to normalize the situation in that area after the progress was made. In other words, he eliminated something that, even according to him, was working. And the problem is that, according to estimated seizure figures, without this structure, 10% less narcotics have been seized in the area compared to 2023, and this at the height of the trafficking boom in Spain. Now, before we all jump to conclusions, what if I told you that the motive for eliminating Ocon South may have been something other than this vague official version? Well, take a look at this news item, because this is where we get to the darkest part of this whole story.
Police search for real estate with millions hidden from former UDEF boss. Police suspect that Oscar Sanchez and drug traffickers were hiding cash in houses and premises that have not yet been located. The head of the civil guard in the port of Valencia, the umpteenth rotten police apple linked to narcotics. David Oliva, the former anti-drug chief of the Strait, from leading the fight against drug trafficking to the public prosecutor's office asking for 6.5 years in prison for bribery.
We could go on for a very long time, passing around headlines of recent cases of narco-related police corruption, and we're not able to tell you all the cases that are appearing. For a little over a year now, more and more news stories have been coming out that indicate that the narco trade is managing to corrupt a small but significant part of the Spanish security forces, which, on the other hand, should come as no surprise, as this is what the narcos are always trying to do. And obviously, the problem is that when this happens, or worse, when this spreads, is when you really run the risk of everything getting out of control. Now, what kinds of things are we talking about exactly? Well, you see, just 1 month before the dissolution of OCON South, the head of the unit, Colonel David Oliva, was removed from his post. At that time, almost the entire unit opposed this measure. But of course, someone may have known things. The minister probably knew things. And it is likely that the problem was so widespread that it was more reasonable to eliminate the structure than to try to clean it up. Well, David Oliva is currently under investigation for allegedly offering an internal affairs lieutenant a premium position in OCON South in exchange for confidential information about an internal investigation called Operation Varea, an investigation that linked him to illicit activities relating to drug trafficking. And according to the summary, his subordinate, far from denouncing his attempt at corruption, accepted the request and began to pass on to his boss classified information that involved him. And VisualPolitik community, this is not the only case. As we told you before, there is another one that has also been in the news lately. That of Oscar Sanchez, a national police officer who was head of the UDEF in Madrid. The UDEF is the Economic and Fiscal Crime Unit of the Spanish police. According to the investigations, Oscar Sanchez is said to have used his position to facilitate the entry of large quantities of cocaine into Spain. Specifically, he is accused of alerting drug traffickers about ongoing investigations and even manipulating data in police databases to protect them. All this, of course, in exchange for huge sums of money. At the moment, some 24 million euros have been discovered in one of his houses, although the police believe he could have made at least 43 million euros. And clearly, these are just two major cases, but then of course we can find dozens of cases of collaborations with drug traffickers that could be described as more discreet. Something along the lines of, I'll keep an eye on this, and I'll pretend I haven't seen you, and you give me X amount of money in return. Not surprisingly, this is a huge problem, not only because it greatly affects the image and credibility of the rest of the police forces, but above all because if it is not nipped in the bud, it risks generating a real knock-on effect for criminal groups around the world. In fact, perhaps cases like this have also contributed to the bad news.
Drugs flow through the strait without the anti-narcotics group. Cocaine is half the price. We have a problem. Chief Anti-Drug Prosecutor, it is difficult to bring in so many drugs through the ports without collaboration from within.
VisualPolitik community, let's be clear. Spain has the necessary ingredients right now to consolidate itself as the new epicenter of narcotics in Europe. And yet, for now, the Spanish government seems to be looking the other way. It has not announced any large-scale plan to fight the rise of drug trafficking, nor anything to curb institutional corruption, and that is concerning. Anyway, only time will tell what happens. For now, the question is all for you. How would you curb a problem like this? Leave us your opinions below in the comments, and let's start a debate. And, very important, if you liked this video, give it a like and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already. And don't forget to go to pdsdebt.com/VisualPolitikEN and take their free 30-second debt assessment. Click the link below in the description and take back control of your finances. As always, thank you very much for watching. All the best. I'll see you next time.